At 2 a.m., nobody heard the knock. But when morning came, an envelope sat on the doorstep. Inside was $47,000. No name, just 3 words: keep this quiet. People in the neighborhood had whispered about a quiet fund that appeared when bills turned red, but nobody knew where it came from. Linda never talked about money, not to neighbors, not to friends. She carried her burdens the way most people carry groceries, silently, carefully, pretending the weight didn't hurt. But those close to her knew. Her sister had seen the letters piling up on her kitchen counter, the ones with red stamps and final notices. Her sister had heard her voice crack on the phone when she thought no one was listening. Her neighbor had watched her stand in the grocery store, putting items back on the shelf one by one, calculating in her head what she could actually afford. It was 1996. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, leaving her with 3 kids and a house she couldn't afford to keep. The mortgage company had given her 48 hours. After that, they'd take the house. She'd spent the last week packing boxes she hoped she wouldn't need. The tape gun sat on the dining table like a weapon. Each sealed box felt like giving up. That Friday night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, running the same numbers over and over, hoping the answer would change. It never did. The kitchen clock ticked too loud. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked twice, then stopped. The world kept moving while hers was ending. By midnight, she'd given up. She turned off the lights and went upstairs, shoulders heavy, eyes dry. There were no tears left. She'd cried them all weeks ago. At 2 a.m., someone knocked. 3 soft taps. Then silence. Linda didn't hear it. No one did. The house stayed dark. A car engine hummed somewhere down the street, then faded. Whoever had been there was already gone. When she came downstairs the next morning, the envelope was there. Plain. White. No postage. No return address. Just her name written in careful handwriting across the front. She picked it up slowly like it might disappear if she moved too fast. Her hands were cold. The morning air bit at her skin through her thin robe. Inside was a cashier's check for $47,000, exactly what she owed. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less. Folded beneath it was a small note on cream-colored paper. The handwriting was the same. It said, "Keep this quiet. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Just take care of your family." She sat down on the porch steps and stared at the check. Her hands were shaking. She read the note 3 times. Then she looked up and down the street. Empty. No movement. No witnesses. Just the sound of sprinklers clicking in a neighbor's yard and the distant rumble of a garbage truck. She folded the note back into the envelope and went inside. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard like she'd just run a mile. What she didn't know, someone had been watching. 3 weeks earlier, her youngest son, Danny, had been at the park. He was 10 years old, small for his age, with a worn-out jacket 2 sizes too big. The sleeves hung past his wrists. He'd rolled them up, but they kept falling back down. He'd been sitting alone on a bench near the swings, tearing up pieces of bread for the pigeons, when a man sat down beside him. The man didn't say much at first, just watched the birds. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were alert, like he noticed everything. Then he asked Danny if he liked music. Danny said yes. The man smiled. He had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners when he grinned. Lines formed around his mouth, soft and genuine. He asked Danny what his favorite song was. Danny said Thriller. The man laughed softly, a quiet sound that seemed almost surprised, and said that was a good choice. They talked for 20 minutes. About music, about school, about how pigeons always seemed to know when someone had food, about nothing important. Before he left, the man asked Danny if everything was okay at home. Danny hesitated. His fingers stopped moving. He looked down at the breadcrumbs scattered on the bench. Then he said his mom was sad a lot, that she didn't smile anymore, that she stayed up late writing checks that always bounced. The man nodded slowly like he understood more than Danny had said. He didn't ask for details. He just told Danny to take care of his mom, that she was lucky to have him. Then he stood up, adjusted something in his jacket pocket, tipped an imaginary hat, and walked away. His footsteps were quiet on the gravel path. Danny watched him go until he turned the corner and disappeared. Danny didn't think much of it. He didn't know who the man was. He'd never seen him before. But 3 weeks later, when his mom opened that envelope, Danny would remember the conversation. He'd remember the way the man had listened without interrupting, without judging, without offering advice, just listening. And he'd remember the white glove tucked into the man's jacket pocket, the edge barely visible, like it wasn't meant to be hidden, but wasn't meant to be seen either. Linda took the check to the bank that Monday. The teller looked at it for a long time. She turned it over, held it up to the light. Then she looked at Linda with curiosity in her eyes. She asked Linda where it came from. Linda said it was a gift. Her voice didn't waver. The teller didn't push. The manager, standing nearby, glanced at the cashier's check stub, initials MJ. No address, but said nothing. The teller processed it without another word. Linda signed the deposit slip with a pen that barely worked, the ink fading halfway through her name. She had to trace over it twice. The mortgage was paid by Tuesday. The letters stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing with automated reminders. The house stayed theirs. But Linda didn't celebrate. She didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not her sister, not her best friend, not even her kids. At least, not right away. She just folded the note back into the envelope and tucked it into a drawer where no one would find it. Between old tax returns and a stack of her late husband's birthday cards, she couldn't throw away. For weeks, she replayed that morning in her mind. The envelope, the handwriting, the exact amount. How did someone know? Who had been paying attention when she'd been so careful to hide her struggle? She'd never posted about it, never asked for help publicly. She'd smiled at church, waved at neighbors, pretended everything was fine. No one knew it yet, but a month later, a white glove would appear. Like and subscribe for more untold kindness. Would you keep this secret? A month later, Linda found it. A single white glove on the armrest of the couch. No one could explain how it got there. She was sweeping the porch when something white caught her eye, tucked beneath the railing near the flower pot that hadn't had flowers in 2 years. A single glove, soft, unmistakable. The kind you'd see on stage, under bright lights in front of thousands of people. It wasn't dirty, wasn't worn. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately, like a signature without a name. She picked it up slowly. Her heart was pounding. The fabric was cool against her palm, smoother than she expected. She knew what it meant, or at least she thought she did, but it didn't make sense. Why her? Why them? They weren't special. They were just a family trying to survive. She brought the glove inside and sat at the kitchen table, turning it over in her hands. The stitching was precise, the fingers perfectly shaped. She held it up to the light and saw nothing. No label, no marking, nothing that would tell her where it came from. Danny walked in and froze. He stared at the glove. Then he looked at his mom. His face went pale. He told her about the man in the park, the conversation, the kindness, the way he'd listened without judging, the way he'd asked if everything was okay, like he actually cared about the answer. Linda listened without interrupting. When Danny finished, she nodded slowly. She didn't need to say anything. They both understood. The pieces had fallen into place. The envelope, the exact amount, the timing, the glove. It all made sense now, in a way that felt impossible, but also inevitable. That night, Linda wrote a letter. She didn't know where to send it, so she never mailed it. She just wrote it and tucked it into the same drawer with the note. She poured out her gratitude on paper, words about being saved, about her kids having a home, about hope returning when none was left. She signed it, but didn't date it. You gave my kids a home. You gave me hope when I had none left. We'll never forget. Some things didn't need timestamps. Years later, the truth would surface. It was 2009. Danny was 23 years old, working as a sound engineer in Los Angeles. He'd followed his love of music, the one that stranger in the park had asked him about all those years ago. He was in a studio one afternoon when the news broke. Michael Jackson had died. The room went silent. Someone turned up the radio. Danny stood frozen, listening to the tributes, the memories, the stories of a man who'd changed music forever. The voice on the radio talked about Thriller, about moonwalking, about sold-out arenas and record-breaking albums. And then he remembered. The park, the conversation, the glove. The way the man had smiled when Danny said Thriller was his favorite song. The way he'd asked about home with genuine concern, not pity. The way he'd walked away without expecting anything in return. He called his mom that night. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. He didn't have to say anything. She already knew. Her voice was thick when she said his name. They talked for over an hour. About the envelope, the note, the glove, the way he'd listened to a 10-year-old boy in a park and cared enough to ask if everything was okay at home. The way he'd known, somehow, that they were drowning and had thrown them a lifeline without asking for credit, without needing recognition, without telling anyone what he'd done. Linda told Danny something she'd never said out loud before. She said she believed he had heard about their situation through someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe a teacher, maybe someone at the bank who'd processed one too many returned checks. She didn't know, but she believed he'd acted because he'd seen himself in Danny, a kid who loved music, a kid who deserved a chance, a kid whose world was falling apart and who still fed pigeons in the park because kindness mattered, even when everything else didn't. But the family never broke their promise. They didn't go to the press. They didn't post about it online. They didn't tell the story to reporters or fans looking for tributes. They kept it quiet, just like the note had asked, because that was the gift, not just the money, but the trust, the belief that kindness didn't need an audience, that some acts of grace were meant to be private, that the people who mattered would know, and that was enough. Linda kept the glove in a small wooden box in her bedroom. She never displayed it, never showed it to guests. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that someone had seen them when they felt invisible, that someone had cared when they thought no one did, that a stranger in a park had taken 20 minutes to listen to a boy talk about music, and in doing so had saved an entire family. Danny still thinks about that day in the park. He wonders if the man knew, even then, what he was going to do, or if it was just a spontaneous decision born out of a 20-minute conversation with a kid who loved Thriller and worried about his mom. He wonders if he had driven by their house afterward, seen the letters piled on the porch, the dim lights inside, the boxes stacked by the door. He wonders if it hurt him to see families struggle, if it reminded him of something from his own past, something he couldn't fix back then but could fix now. He'll never know for sure, but he likes to think it was both, that he saw something in him worth protecting, and that, in return, he'd protected something in them, their home, their dignity, their hope. That a man who'd spent his life performing for millions had chosen to help one family in silence. That the greatest gift wasn't the money, it was being seen,